tribal perspective about tribal solid waste. So coming to like the hazardous waste grant for tribes, I'm not going to be talking about that because my colleague from Saboba is going to be addressing that, but we'll be in the room to help answer the questions. So here is just a summary to reinforce the point. Many agencies fund different aspects of solid waste, and you can call solid waste lots of different things. The funding follows certain categories, but each agency funds slightly different aspects with different requirements. As you can see, and at the bottom we have our, oh, next slide. Sorry, Alexis. Next slide. Back one. Okay, this is the summary, a summary of different agencies that fund solid waste. And in a number of different ways, and we're going to be covering a lot of that. Next slide. We're going to start off with gap funding, which is the broadest single category of funding and the one that's traditionally under EPA control. It's an ongoing challenge, right? Because just because something is allowable under gap, it does not necessarily mean that the funding is sufficient to be able to provide that funding to you. So as I'm going to go through just a couple slides on gap, and Nico, I would love for you to just interject or correct me, because Nico's got much more depth of experience on gap and solid waste. And with that, we're going to go to our special slides, right? Next slide.
Okay. Woo. So we're not doing the full-on Family Feud trash clash because we realized we actually had real information to convey to you, but we do have a couple slides as a game to show the broad breadth of what GAP has funded in the past, because I think it's so informative when you're chatting with your GAP PO, and I am not a GAP PO, but to know that, well, I heard that other tribe got this funded, or this tribe got that funded, you know, so to see like of everything that GAP funded. So in FY22, what do you think was the most funded or the most popular waste-related commitment in GAP? Shout it out. Oh, I heard one top one. Recycling. Ta-da! 42 tribes had recycling. Okay, there's a whole bunch on here, so just shout out other things that you think people funded with GAP commitments. Okay, I heard composting and then solid waste dump cleanup. Is it on the board? This is intense. Open dump, 22 tribes had open dump in their GAP work plans. And composting, where are you at? Woo, 26. Hopefully that number grows. Okay, there's still a lot of space on that board. What else do you think got funded? Tires and vehicles. Let's see, tires. Do we have tires on the board? Tires, 6. And vehicles, abandoned automobile. Oh, 5. Good work. Trash, oh, equipment's the next slide. This is just activities. Hazmat, do we have hazardous waste, household hazardous waste collection? Woo woo, 27 people had some hazardous waste, household hazardous waste related collection activity. Brownfields is a separate one. What else was? White appliance collection or white goods. I'm not sure what I titled this on the slide, Alexis. Let me see. Bulky items. Is it on the board? I can't remember. No, not on the board. Oh, but what do most folks include in a white item collection? Appliances, it usually gets called recycling, or like you open it up for the whole community and you collect it. Community cleanup, I heard it. I heard Nico, someone asked, can you still do a community cleanup? Yes. And 37 people did. So like, let's hear what other, we still have a lot of, oh, you know, Household hazardous waste is already on there. That's the HHW acronym. I heard e-waste. E-waste, are you on there? No, that would be a strike. What else do we have? I heard trailers. Equipment is the next slide. This is just kind of activities. Although I did equipment and supplies. There is a category, sorry, I lied. Transfer station, equipment and supplies. We still have a few more. That would be under equipment. What else do people do on solid waste? That's equipment. Education and outreach. Are you on the board? What? There we go. We have a few more. Can we fill it out? What else do you do? We love sorting trash. Waste assessment, waste characterization. Yes, 21 people or 21 tribes. We have a few more. Oh, and what do you do to help prevent open dumping? Ordinances, codes and ordinances, enforcement. So enforcement is one, codes and ordinances another. Planning documents. You know what? I don't think I have planning documents on here. Oh, no, we do. Planning documents. Show me integrated solid waste management plan. What? 24 tribes in FY22 funded an update or a new integrated solid waste management plan. Let's see, what else do we still have on here? Oh, this is part of the composting workshop. What are these called when you learn new skills? Training related to solid waste. Well, you know what? Here's the thing. You need to have activities that your staff do, and that's how you get them paid. So having the activities then justifies the FTE. Okay, it happens in April. A lot of people have Earth Day, have collection events around Earth Day events, yes. And two more, can we finish this out? What is there? Oh, this long time couldn't be funded under GAP because they said, no, we don't do implementation. We don't do O&M is an acronym for it. Operation and maintenance. Yeah, yes, it is allowable. Let it be known. I know, don't tell your POs. You heard it here, but it's 9 people got it funded in FY22. And last one, close to my heart, favorite, kind of new-ish. It involves food waste prevention, food waste, yes, recovery. So look at that wide breadth of activities that were funded in FY22 by other tribes in Region 9. It gives you a sense of just like the amount of different things that you can do to help build and grow your solid waste management program, and maybe gives you some new ideas. And that's what Deirdre and I are here for too, as you have your consultation calls and you're thinking like, oh, what would be the next step in our GAP work plan? Talk to us, because we see all the work plans. We have a sense of like how you can help build and grow your program and what would be next. Okay, one last slide and then I'll turn it back over to Deirdre. What? Well, this was actually special because it was really working with tribal schools or other like the Elders Kitchen to help prevent food waste. So like doing education and outreach on better storage practices and tips to like keep the food to actually be eaten before it goes into the compost. But yeah, it's kind of related, but it's more upstream. It's the source reduction part. Okay, top funded equipment and supply purchases. Trash truck, let me see trash truck. Actually, in FY22, we did not buy any, but 2 pickup trucks. I know, but tribes have gotten trash trucks funded. They're just really expensive. Nico, any sense of what kind of pickup trucks they were?
Yeah, no idea.
Okay.
Big, beautiful trucks.
Oh, there, Mike has it. Ford F-150 with a lift gate.
I got a 550 with a
Wow, a 550 with an automatic dump bed. So we have the 2 truck purchases right here in the room. Yeah. What other equipment did GAP buy? Pardon? Flammable or household hazardous waste. That would be a good one. No one did it in FY22, but that would be, you could fund hazardous waste storage cabinets. Compactors, do I see compactors? I'm going to call it a baler, and yes. Baler, compactor. A shredder, yes. Is it on the board? Yes. What do you think the number 1 was? Chipper was on there? Yes. What do people like to put their trash in? Dumpsters, yes. Roll-offs, dumpsters. 4 tribes got dumpsters funded. And generically, your gloves, your PPE. Yep, PPE, supplies, bags, bins. Oh, never mind, bins is a separate category. Recycling bins. And our last one, I heard it earlier, it helps protect a space. Fence. And there we go. Okay, well, thank you for appeasing me in this little game. As you can see, GAP can buy a lot. They don't have separate additional funding for solid waste stuff. But, you know, make the request and show how it fits into your program, into your integrated waste management plan. Yeah, Tom. I'm guessing a wood shredder, but I don't know. Like, we review the plans, but then we don't actually see what was purchased. Oh, sounds like he bought it. Oh, okay, a paper shredder. Oh, wow. Yeah, wood separated chippers from shredders. Yeah. Yeah, no, we're all in the same boat. Okay, back to Deirdre. Thanks, Alexis.
Chippers, shredders, it's a fine line. So just to say, okay, that this was going to be a whole hour that Jenny and I had planned for, and we were going to have 2 teams of competitors that you guys would have competed for fabulous prizes, but we didn't get that session approved. So we just stuck it in here. But you got a little taste. So next year we're going to do another game show, I'm sure. Oh yeah, well, I'll come back for that. Let me just get back to my notes here. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Here's a picture of the cover of the new the new GAP guidance. And all I can really say about it is that solid waste continues to be listed as one of the national program priorities. But from the initial analysis that we've done, we don't see the language for what can be funded having changed very much. So nothing really surprising to tell you about the GAP guidance so far as we know. Next slide. So Jenny just stole my thunder by doing the game show, because like this is basically you know, a lot of activities that GAP has funded over time. We didn't really talk about integrated solid waste management plans. So let's just touch on that. You know, those are necessary for various reasons. It can help you get funding as a critical reason. Indian Health Service, before they fund a transfer station or open dump cleanup, want to see that the tribe has written and has passed through council an integrated solid waste management plan. And if you get that plan approved by your council, then you get that funding, you get that bean for it. And at this point, most tribes have one, but if you don't, I'd really recommend that you get one. Or if you've got a really old one from like 2005, please update it, because I'm sure that your priorities as a tribe have probably changed since then. So when you do one of these things, don't start from scratch, because there's some good examples out there that we can send to you, examples of plans that we think are worth imitating. And if there's language in there that you want to use, just use it. Like don't write one of these things from scratch. Another thing I just wanted to mention quickly is waste characterization. Has anybody in the room done one? Good, that's great. A lot of you guys have. So if you want to know more about that, I recorded a webinar about waste characterization about 6 months ago, and it's on the Tribal Solid Waste website if you want to look it up. And it's got a lot of photographs about how we at EPA do these and the kind of scope that we typically use in helping tribes with these. Next slide. So implementation, it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, Nico, but the line between program development and implementation in terms of solid waste has kind of blurred a little bit, because as of 2006, we've been able to pay for actual transport and disposal of solid waste, which prior to that we weren't able to do. So collection, transport, storage, backhaul, disposal of solid waste and recoverable resources like recyclables, compost, e-waste, bulk waste, construction debris, light bulbs and things like that. You can pay for transport and disposal of that under GAP. Likewise, equipment, vehicle, facility operations and maintenance, which we just talked about, including fuel. And then repairing and upgrading and replacing any solid waste facilities that you've got and so forth. So a critical thing to fund or to think about in terms of expanding or developing your program would be prevention. Preventing dumping on tribal lands. So education and outreach on proper disposal and illegal dumping, community cleanup events that you're going to hear about in the next. Nico, is there anything that defines a community cleanup event? I mean, basically it's like a one-time event, right? It's not an ongoing thing. And is there anything else that limits what a community cleanup can be?
Not necessarily. I think it's going to look different at every tribe. And so, my response to a lot of this is just working with your GAP project officer to clarify the activity and to describe it properly in your work plan. But community cleanups, we normally fund one a year, but in certain instances we can fund multiple if it's needed and you make a good case for it. So.
Development of codes and ordinances. This year, EPA headquarters had some great resources available in terms of technical assistance. They actually had an attorney on the payroll at headquarters to directly help tribes with developing and writing, improving their codes and ordinances. Hopefully that still exists, I don't know, but what a great resource to take advantage of, free legal assistance. Sometimes we see trainings made available through IHS. It's really helpful to look at what other tribes have issued in terms of codes and ordinances. It really, really helps. The more successful ones are the ones that really spell out what is dumping and what are the consequences for it, because a lot of solid waste codes and ordinances that we see are purposefully vague. It's like they don't want to offend anybody by accusing anybody in the code of doing something wrong, which means that you can't really enforce it. So you can also have data management systems to log violations, keeping a spreadsheet about what folks like you who patrol the tribal lands find, where you found it, to be able to write it down and log it and understand what to ask for as far as cleanup resources. Data management systems, other types of computer systems, we can pay for regular patrols for illegal dumping, partnership building with law enforcement. Some tribes are a little bit reluctant to engage local law enforcement, but many counties will have blight ordinances, and a county sheriff could potentially help you with enforcing blight ordinances by, helping you with who's coming on and off tribal lands, like helping you potentially look for that, enforce against it. Some tribes have done this, so think about that as a way to extend your law enforcement capacity. Signage to discourage dumping, barricades near dumping sites, and then trail and security cameras are all, good ideas for the enforcement activities. Okay, so transfer stations, funds for transfer stations and associated equipment. Again, this is a category that was really hard to fund in prior years, but suddenly, temporarily, there's so much opportunity. So GAP funds can be used for transfer stations and other solid waste related equipment. Remember that, oh, let me just go to the next slide, please, Alexis. Sorry, next slide. Oh yeah, we're gonna pause for questions.
And then I'll come over to Mike.
Tom Gusty. Tom Gusty, Bishop Paiute Tribe. I just had a question. If you could go back to, well, just for the law enforcement with the collaborations, could be technical assistance also, like providing them with creating maps and all that?
Oh yeah, I mean, technical assistance, that would be a great thing to fund. GIS databases, like
Yes.
for example, up at HOOPA, they have this whole GIS-based system that they help to track like locations and stuff. So definitely. And thanks for bringing that up.
Good morning. Mike Shiver, Environmental Director with Middletown Rancheria Pomo Indians.
Oh, hey, Mike.
In Indian country, we do some of the climate impacts. We have large tree die-offs in many of the southwest regions. In Middletown Rancheria, we've had over 1,000 trees die on our 100 acres. We have a huge amount of biomass that we're trying to deal with, chipping a lot of the branches, but looking at air burner curtains to combust some of the larger wood mass, and it's more environmentally friendly when it's done in these air curtains, gives off less gases, and even possibly into biochar energy or bioenergy. Is there any ability to kind of fund with solid waste biomass projects of that scale?
So funding biomass, biochar projects. I know that there's various tribes in the Pomo area, the Pomo tribes in the Lake County area that are interested in that. We have not funded it yet. I think it would take some conversation with folks in our zero waste program to really drill down into whether that should be funded and how it should be funded. But it's on our radar, and keep bringing it up because there's other tribes in your region that also are interested.
Oh, yes, I wanted to bring up the concept because
Should I go on? I'll go on.
Like, give me it.
Oh, back
So,
to you, Tom. Back to you.
With the fencing, what kind of qualifies as the fencing? Is it just for closing out open dumps, or is it for anything like your
That's a
equipment?
great question. I mean, if you can argue that the fencing is about keeping people out or animals out of an area that you feel is at risk of being dumped upon, yes, it's fundable.
Does it
Second
have to
question.
be chain link fence, or can it be like
No, it
barbed
could be
wire?
like a concrete barrier.
Razor wire.
It could be, yeah.
Okay.
The only thing that gets tricky is like when, this is so dumb, but like the whole notion of what is construction, if you're like trying to build it into the ground, like needing approval for construction, which seems really silly, but they still, Nico, headquarters still wants approval for quote unquote construction, even if it's about installing a fence.
Yeah, there's herb ground, you have to go through a different process. So you'd have to go through like a NEPA review. And so it's often easier to just do a chain link fence or something, simpler. But if you want something more solid and you want to have a concrete, fence, we can work with you to fund it. It just may take a little bit longer.
Tom, the last time that somebody wanted to do that, it seemed like it was approved very quickly. So it's not like, I would definitely try. Okay, next slide. Let's look specifically at the activities that relate to transfer station development and construction. So GAP can fund environmental engineering assistance with utility master planning and sanitary surveys. Oh, I'm sorry, we're on IHS funding. Okay, so this is the giant pool of money we talked about earlier. So environmental engineering assistance with utility master planning and sanitary surveys. And this can be anything. It can be like a geological survey, to prepare a site. It can be, establishing like a concrete pad, all the way to, creating a design, constructing it. IHS can fund all these phases of the project. We're not going to be using a slide on this, but I would suggest also looking at the Brownfields program if the site that you're looking at has any sort of history of, dumping in the past, or you're thinking there is some contamination there. Brownfields cleanup funding can actually pay for like leveling that area or giving it a concrete surface, like the beginning of your transfer station. So if that's your situation, think hard about maybe contacting the Brownfields TBA program to say, we want a future use for this site to be a transfer station, and we would like to know if this ground has been disturbed with hazardous chemicals in the past. So I think about that.
Deirdre? Over here, Nick, just real quick.
Oh,
we have, somebody from Cal Recycle, Tracy Harper, said also that Cal Recycle has a grant open that pays for cleanup of tribal land where illegal dumping has happened. And there's a link in the chat as well for folks to access after the presentation.
Yeah, and Tracy, we're going to be talking about those grants in a little bit. We're going to get to cleanup in the next unit. But okay. Tracy, you can keep commenting. So yeah, these are all the ways, all the technical aspects of transfer station development that IHS can fund. So talk to your IHS engineer, get your project on this SDS list. I'll show you the checklist of how to do that in a little bit further on. Next slide. There is a program through USDA that allows for transfer station development as well. There's a match requirement. I think it's up to 15%, but it fluctuates depending upon working it out with your local USDA representative. The percentage of loan versus grant is based on the organization's eligibility. USDA in the past has funded projects with 100% grant funds and no loan component. Limitations to this, and I know one of our colleagues in the room here has contacted their USDA office to try to get transfer station funded, but because the particular county that this tribe is in doesn't have the same, it doesn't meet up with the criteria that USDA wants to see in terms of income level. You have to show that your site is in an area of, poverty, low income. So that is a barrier there. But contact USDA as a potential source of funds. The solid waste infrastructure. Oh, next slide. Solid waste infrastructure for recycling program, brand new grant program under the bipartisan infrastructure law. We're going to be talking about this at the end of the presentation because we want an exciting climax. So we're going to touch on that at the end. I'm going to save the best for last. Okay, next slide. Funds to address open dumping. Before we get too far into detail about open dumping, let's be clear about the kind of cleanup that you need help with. And so sometimes that you have a problem that you cannot handle safely. So hazardous substance contamination is addressed under the CERCLA removal program. And that can also include not just, helping you with the cleanup, but technical assistance, assessment if the tribe itself wants to do this. And they can actually, do the removal operations themselves as well. So there's a phone number for that. EPA assistance for cleanup of any hazardous substance release or petroleum release. There's an EPA duty officer on duty 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So make use of that program. So like, for example, things that they've cleaned up recently on tribal lands have included illegal drug manufacturing waste. They've gone in and removed that. They've gone in and done removals for household hazardous waste, collected household hazardous waste, so it's been illegally dumped on tribal lands. They've cleaned that up. Another issue they can help with, and this probably may affect a lot of you over time, they can help with, if their time permits, is when you've got a drum of something that you don't know what's in it. I know this happens to lots of folks. So contact this emergency response. I know it's not an emergency per se, but the tribal person that deals with the tribal aspects of this program can help you, like, find a contractor that maybe is going to charge you less, or they can sometimes they can actually, under their cleanup, whatever cleanup they've got going on in the area, they can actually stop by and pick up that drum if you're lucky. It doesn't always work out that way because they're spread very thin. But really, I would advise you to contact them for ideas on how to deal with this, because I know if you don't know what's in there, it can be a really expensive problem to solve. Next slide. Actually, can you go one more further, because I have this slide out of order. Okay, cleanup under GAP. So if we're going to fund this, the cleanup and closure work should include documentation on the amount of waste that you plan to remove and that was actually removed, the types of waste removed. So some of the criteria that the Tribal Program Office uses in determining where to fund cleanup. Let's see, I've got these slides out of order. Well, so kind of off the top of my head, the criteria that EPA would look at as far as funding these would be, do you have an integrated solid waste management plan? Do you have any sort of codes and ordinances in place to prevent future dumping? What other criteria might we look at before funding or prioritizing the funding of open dump cleanup?
Yeah, so we like to see some kind of prevention, strategy in place. In addition to an WMP, like to see open dumps in your ETEPs. So there used to be a very specific criteria that headquarters outlined and a process in place that they would ultimately approve whether or not EPA funds could be used to close an open dump. Those have actually been waived and removed in the new GAP guidance. I'm not really supposed to speak too much about the new GAP guidance, but that is one of the changes. And so decision-making has been delegated back to the regions. So again, work with your GAP project officer and they'll talk through what should be in place. But it's usually education and outreach, some preventative measures, ISWMP, and having open dumps in your ETEP.
Tom?
Now, when you say preventative measures, one thing we do is like when we go to places and clean up on assignments or stuff, when we have to do that, or is it allowable to have some type of agreement with that land assignment owner that if this happens again, there will be fines and everything? Would that be considered preventative measure?
Yeah,
yes.
Because that's your solid waste codes and ordinances, right? I mean, it would be really great if that could be stipulated in the code and ordinance, right? That, if this happens again, this is the consequence. Again, in terms of spelling this stuff out, can I just call your attention to the UROC codes and ordinances, because it's very, very in-depth, and it gets into the very specific consequences about what are, the specific language about what are the consequences for the first time that you commit an infraction, the second time, the third time. Sorry. And I think that is a really great model. You may not want to go that far. It's super helpful to see, okay, this is the extent to which we can get very specific about the problems that we do not want to see happening on tribal lands. So you can look it up online. The UROC codes and ordinances is really good.
Good morning, guys. What happens if we have a checkerboard reservation and the folks that live on a checkerboard reservation have issues with the tribe coming on or around their area and doing community cleanup or something around their area, and you go to find out what's wrong with it and they're pushing it towards the river? What kind of things can we do for that? Whose line does that go up?
That's a really good question. Does GAP distinguish at all between, like allotment, assignment land, regular trust land?
It can. So watch what I say here a little bit. Sometimes it behooves you to be more detailed in your work plan. And sometimes it behooves you to be less detailed and a little bit more vague. So it's working again with your project officer to identify the problem and then how we can frame things to get it cleaned up. But I would say that yes, that is something that we can work with you on. We're not restricted just to tribal lands themselves. So we can actually, if there's dumping that's occurring outside of a reservation and it's impacting the reservation in any way, we can support cleanups, support outreach, we can support all of the gap eligible activities in those areas, even outside of the reservation, if it impacts the reservation or the community in any way. And I don't know if that answers your question exactly.
But
okay.
we acknowledge that that is a really tricky problem, right? Some of the most difficult dump sites that we deal with in Region 9 are the kinds of allotment lands that you're talking about where the tribe has control. So I get it. Really, really tough to deal with. Next slide. Oh, wait. Yeah, okay. So this is the basic criteria. I'm sorry, the process that IHS has people go through if they want to have open dump cleaned up or if they want to have transfer stations constructed. Someone's pointing at me. Okay. So, you're locating your site, you're completing a risk assessment to the extent that you can, right? You're inputting that information. You work with IHS to input that information into their system that's called OMDS. The IHS will want to see that you have an integrated solid waste management plan, and they're going to talk to us about that. They're going to want EPA to do like a capability assessment. So we fill these out. I filled out several for tribes already, and I expect to continue doing so. That basically assures IHS that yes, the tribe, they've got code and ordinances, or they're on the way to getting codes and ordinances. They have active outreach. They have things in place to prevent, to help curb future open dumping. So yeah, work with that capacity assessment. You can contact us separately if you want to get the jump on it. Like if you don't want to wait for IHS to ask us to produce it, we can produce it if you want to just get the jump on it.
Good morning.
Hello.
How large of a open dump will IHS fund cleanup? And will they do hazardous waste?
Those are really good questions. In reverse order, they don't do hazardous waste. Talk to EPA. But what IHS does is that they want to have that hazardous waste aspect cleaned up and removed, and then they will do the rest, or it'll be done in sequence. So you want to talk to emergency response about the hazardous waste aspect of it. And then as far as the size of the dump, that's a great question. I have not seen in the literature any limitation on the size of the dump that can be cleaned up. Half acre. No, I thought that was the minimum. Is that the max or the minimum?
That's the minimum.
Right.
It has to be half acre.
Yeah.
Count.
Yeah. So it has to be
A continuous half acre.
Yeah.
What if you've got 200 acres of commingled facility and municipal open dump waste?
200 acres?
At least.
Well, we should talk.
Yeah.
Try to figure out
We
more about
should,
that.
because I can't get tribal emergency response to care about it.
What is your tribe?
It's Navajo Nation, but I've gone to Region 9 emergency response, and they helped with the asbestos hazard, which was great.
Yeah.
But the open dump is like far over everyone's
Exactly.
scope. But there's so much money right now, there must be a way to characterize that dump.
Yeah, I can talk to you. You probably know the story about why that's gotten turned down in the past by IHS, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But it's really good to see you. I'm so glad that there's someone here, from Navajo on this really important issue. Thank you for taking the time to come to the conference. So
I looked at IHS's listing. I know they were tasked with listing the open dumps, and they just didn't look at that one.
Right. Well, I think part of that. Well, let me talk to you more about what specifically Navajo and how they've interpreted that in the past. This is the OMDS survey form that you fill out, Next slide. just to nerd out a little bit. They want to, you know, get an estimate of like how big it is and how much waste is there. But there's some easy calculations like number of loads in a pickup truck. You can estimate it that way and so forth. Next slide. So this is getting into what our colleague Tracy Harper from Cal Recycle was talking about earlier, farm and ranch cleanup grants. Has anybody here used a farm and ranch cleanup grant through Cal Recycle? Great. It's nice to have you here. So Cal Recycle, you know, they have funded a lot of tribes to do this, and it is for California only. It's available quarterly, so you can. It doesn't, you know, it's not like there's one annual application. You can apply quarterly, and Cal Recycle is very generous about what constitutes agricultural property. So tribal lands, you know, that you can make the argument that it's about, you know, we are preserving resources for the future. There's an agricultural aspect to that. So it needs to be clear that the waste has been dumped on tribal lands by others. You can't use that fund to clean up a dump that the tribe itself is responsible for. Tribes can get multiple grants in sequence over time to clean up one and then start another. The thing that puts off some tribes from this program is that it's a reimbursable program. So you would put out a certain amount of dollars to have somebody start cleaning up, and then you would send that receipt to Cal Recycle, and then they would reimburse you. So I know that puts off some people, but apparently they're very quick about turning it around. Anybody who's used this program have any comments about like the reimbursement aspect? Was that a big problem for you? If you don't mind my asking. It wasn't a problem. That's good to know. Yeah, I would really encourage you to apply, because sometimes this is undersubscribed, and again, they've often funded tribal cleanups. Next slide. So, question over here. Hustle, Nico, get over there.
Thank you. My name is Megan, and I work for the Pechanga Band of Indians in Temecula, California. And I was just wondering, for that specific grant program, could the funds be used for property that's currently being put into trust but is not in trust yet?
I believe they could. It just depends on the definition of agricultural property. That might be more of a stopper than the ownership status. But talk to Cal Recycle about that. And Tracy, if you want to comment on that in the chat and answer our friend's question, who's from Pechanga. I'm going to give you Tracy's contact information too after the session. Yeah.
And this is for the person who did the Cal Recycle? Okay. Did you use any employee staff hours, and how would you go on about doing that in order to get reimbursed for that?
Well, actually, can the two of you guys get together after the session? Oh, it's the person in back with the green shirt. Thank you. So here's a special category of dumping that is a big problem for tribes. And actually, I think I'm going to try to move a little bit faster. We're having too much fun, and we need to get to the end of the presentation. So IHS in general does not fund cleanup of automobiles. And to get started on this, to figure out how to get at the root of this problem, the first thing you need to do is talk to your local hauler and find out what would it cost. So it used to be that you could get funds from a hauler for the value of the car, but that's really no longer the case in a lot of places. And in a lot of places like Northern California, the tribe ends up having to pay the hauler to get the stuff cleared off. And you also need to talk to your hauler about what kind of paperwork they're going to require the tribe to submit. So this varies by area. You know, strangely, this whole transfer of title thing is a big challenge. The hauler can take care of the cost, can handle the change of title for you, but it's going to cost you an extra fee. But for a lot of tribes, this is worth it, just because that breaking the chain of title can be so time consuming, and if you're not used to it, you know, really a drag. Next slide. So, you know, again, for abandoned vehicles, write an ordinance or an enforcement approach around this. The Hupa and Yurok tribes have done this a lot and have a lot of expertise to share. Again, check out the codes and ordinances at HOOPA. At HOOPA and at UROC. HOOPA also has a whole database they've set up, GIS-based database on abandoned vehicles because it has been such a problem. And here's an example here of a public outreach document developed on abandoned vehicles. Next slide. So the largest single source that I've seen for funding on large-scale automobile cleanups is BIA. And they have this category funding called DECRMS. But DECRMS is only available to the tribe like once a year. It's based on if there's money available from the prior year. And it's a whole negotiation with the chairperson about, is this abandoned auto issue the #1 issue that we want funded? In some cases it is. Like HOOPA's done this, I think more than once, but they'll do these giant car crushing events because they've got 100 cars. So last resort, got a lot of vehicles. I would look at BIA through this DECRMS program. Next slide. Also, abandoned automobiles cleaned up through the Farm and Ranch Cleanup Grant. The Rezaghini Rancheria used this to haul a bunch of cars out of the river. Really helped them a lot and it also helped prevent more from coming on. There was a real backlog before these changes happened, and the backlog has now been reduced. Next slide. Funds for composting programs. Be thinking about composting as part of your solid waste program. Next slide. So here is a program available through USDA Community Compost and Food Waste Reduction Grant. This is available, the funding cycle is over the summer. And the next slide I want to show you, Alexis, next slide. A really great program that was funded at Blue Lake Rancheria, where they've got this, they got a grant to expand and improve their composting system that goes hand in hand with their community gardens. So the tribe's compost piles receive all the spent grain and post-consumer fruit and vegetable scraps from the casino kitchen. And then a local timber company drops off wood chips to help, make that green-brown ratio appropriate. Allows them to mulch the garden and conserve water. So that's a really interesting grant to know about. Next slide. More composting grants through USDA. This urban agriculture program has a whole slew of planning projects and implementation projects, 2 different categories. This has the same funding cycle, so think about the next funding cycle coming up next summer if you want to apply. Next slide. I think I'm actually going to skip this one. And then Cal Recycle also has funding in this area. They have right now. There's a organization that it can provide technical assistance. California Alliance for Community Composting, and you can talk to Cal Recycle. You can get Tracy Harper's number to get hooked up with some free technical assistance on composting. Next slide. Here's some non-government source available for this. The Gather Food Sovereignty Grant, funded through the Tides Foundation, the Indigenous Peoples Fund. It's targeting emerging projects that focus on developing tribal food sovereignty. And of course, composting and food sovereignty go hand in hand. Next slide. We are now at our slide about Swiffer. And it's going to be coming out soon. And Jenny, can you say a few words about Swiffer? What's coming up?
Yeah, it's probably good that we're limited on time because there's not much I'm supposed to say. If you can go to the next slide. Because the RFP and programs are going to be released soon. There's 3 categories, one for states, which is non-competitive, states and territories. There's a competitive program, and then there's going to be one for tribes. The last I heard is the announcement for tribes will probably be coming out around January. But as you see, the RFP for the state and the competitive one, which is supposed to be released mid-November, America Recycles Day, not sure if they'll make it. You'd see kind of what activities they're focused on. It's increasing recycling, really focused on infrastructure, would fund FTE, would fund equipment, would include organics recycling through composting. So that will be the main one that would be of interest. And then we also have an education and outreach grant, which will be competitive, open, nationally competed, really focused on recycling and outreach, education, Tribes are eligible for both, but there's not going to be a separate category for tribes within that Rio grant.
You go to the next slide really fast, Alexis. Yeah.
So this is just broadly what the bipartisan infrastructure law, solid waste infrastructure for recycling, SWIFR will fund. With tribes, you know, I think at TLEF, cool, 2 minutes, it was indicated that it would be non-competitive just to manage expectations. I think it's switching to competitive grants. But the official announcement will be coming out in a couple months, maybe earlier. But really looking to support infrastructure for recycling, hub and spoke development, equipment, transfer stations, all that good stuff.
And the amount of money is a lot of funding. So
yeah, I mean, looking for the first year, not that you heard it from me, but about 40 million to tribes in the first announcement that goes out. So be thinking of your projects.
And then Alexis, can you go forward 2 slides? Here we go. So just to close it off, resources for tribes. There's a funding directory that has about 35 different funding sources, but if you see, I've passed around a spiral notebook to ask people to sign their name and their email, and I will send you in a chart version all the funding sources that I've discussed today and where to find out more information. So it's a 5-page thing. It's a digest of everything you've seen that I hope will be useful to you. So make sure you get on that list. And then finally, if you want to join the RTOC Solid Waste Work Group that Rob, Roy, and I we share the glory, you know, join us. We talk every couple of months or so. Bring us your solid waste questions and concerns, and you can talk to me or talk to Rob Roy about getting on that list. And that brings this exciting hour to a close. But any more questions, you can talk to me or Jenny or Nico. And we're so glad you came. Thank you so much for getting up early and coming to our session.